All right, good evening. It is 7 o'clock Mountain Time, so we will go ahead and get started. So, when we ended last week's class, this is the third and final class of Meditation 101. Next week, Venerable Katie will begin Introduction to Mindfulness. But when we left off last week, we were discussing the five negative states of mind that can be an issue or are an issue in our meditation sessions. And the reason that they are an issue, we were talking about meditation as this skill of calm, focused attention. And these negative mental states, because they are very charged, they are, very emotionally charged in relation to the objects that they are pulling the mind toward or wanting to pull the mind away from. They disturb the mind, they agitate the mind because their nature is to be in relation not to just ordinary objects or kind of neutral objects, but these very, very emotionally charged objects. Like we talked last week about objects of anger, objects of attachment or craving. And those are very kind of primordial drives that we have when we want to move toward objects of attachment. We want to be separated from objects of anger or aversion. And so, of course, this is a tendency, this is a habit that we're practicing in our waking lives. And so when we're trying to calm the mind, focus the mind, these powerful objects of attachment and aversion are the kinds of objects that the mind is going to gravitate toward. Um, so the third of these five negative states of mind, and again, they're negative because they disturb our peace of mind, and because when we're in relationship, not necessarily so much in meditation, but when they arise in daily life, in our relationships with others, then they are the kinds of states of mind that motivate us to act in ways that cause harm to others. When people are absorbed in loving kindness and compassion, in generosity and patience, when that's deeply present in our experience, we don't raise our voice in anger, we don't steal, we don't kill, we don't engage in harmful non-virtues that harm those around us. But when the mind is absorbed in hatred, in these negative states of mind, then not only is it painful internally when it arises, not only does it serve as an obstacle to our own spiritual growth, but outside of meditation, it is the driving force behind actions that actually harm those around us. So, pride, or more specifically, afflicted pride, is the third of these five negative mental states. There's ordinary pride, which is fine. Ordinary pride is just a sense of satisfaction at having accomplished something, feeling good about how something worked out, something went well, and you feel, that you did well, and you're happy about having done well. That's no problem. But afflicted pride is a comparative mind. Afflicted pride is where we think, not only am I feeling satisfied in something that I've done, but on the basis of having done something or having a particular quality, then I'm actually better than someone else because I'm capable of doing something, or because I have a particular personality trait or competency. Then I'm actually superior to those around me who I feel don't possess that particular trait or ability or competency. And so these perceived competencies can be true or they can be exaggerated, right? We may think that we're really good at something because we haven't received sufficient feedback to really learn that we're not as good at it as we think that we are. Or it could absolutely be true. We may be extremely skilled in a particular area. But either way, when that sense of satisfaction at doing something well turns into a comparative mind, where we think, on the basis of this, I am better than someone else, even just one other person, then that kind of comparative mind is a problem from a spiritual point of view because we begin to look down on others. We begin to feel superior to others, and then we find fault in others. And particularly with respect to, embarking on or being interested in a path of spiritual development, this can really block us if we feel like people don't have anything to teach us, that there's nothing that we need to learn, or that there's nothing that we don't know. If we're so used to fixating on our skills, our competencies, and not wanting to look at or think about the areas where we really do need to grow, or the things, our ability to move beyond current level competencies and move into greater development, then we're going to be blocked from taking on challenges, from growing, from learning, and we're going to just be isolated and separated from even our spiritual guides, those that are really trying to show us where the edges of our current capacities and competencies are, because it's much more comfortable to just focus on, well, but I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that. And because of that, I have this overinflated sense of self-importance. So it's not unnatural, it's not abnormal, to be this way. Just like it's not abnormal or unnatural to have the tendency of anger, the tendency of aversion, but it's something to be aware of. It's a habit pattern, a tendency that is an obstacle for us, particularly if we want to make progress on the spiritual path. And then the fourth is envy, which is another kind of comparative mind. Envy is different in the sense that we're looking outward and we're observing other people and we're looking at the things that they are experiencing, the things that they have, or that they've been able to do, or that they've been able to experience, or that they've been able to collect or amass in their life. And then we think, instead of having a mind that rejoices in their good fortune, we instead think, why not me? Why hasn't that happened in my life? Why don't I possess that? Which doesn't really accomplish anything, right? I mean, they are the ones that do have that new car. They are the ones that got that promotion. They're the ones that have this object or this relationship or whatever it might be. And wanting that for ourselves is only going to serve to disturb our peace of mind, our contentment. It's not going to generate, of course, we may be motivated. We might see things and then be motivated to think, well, how can I, in my own life, create those causes and conditions? And we might go about a path of development or progress to go in a certain direction. But if it's just thinking, why didn't this happen to me? I wish this had happened to me. This should have happened to me. then we're going to be stuck in this pattern of feeling like nothing is ever enough. We're never contented. Um, and it's actually a comparative mind that has a flavor almost of anger, at what others have been able to do, have been able to accomplish. And it's going to continually serve to disturb our peace of mind, our inner contentment, our sense of joy. um, and so, that again, it's a very emotionally charged way of relating to others. And so it's a story that is likely, if we really empower this habit, this tendency, then as we try to quiet the mind, as we try to absorb the mind in these virtuous objects, then we're going to get pulled out of that by thinking about our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers who have done these things or gotten these things that we haven't been able to get or have, and then just ruminate on that in a really unproductive way, um, that is going to prevent progress in our meditation, practice. So then the fifth of these afflictions or delusions is called ignorance. And ignorance in Buddhism is something that has a lot of layers to it, layers that we can't unpack, so much in this class. There's more of that that's presented in the Buddhism in a Nutshell class. Um, but we can think of ignorance on two levels. One is um, simply not knowing, the way that, being confused about the way that things are, not knowing the way that things are. And then also there's a deeper level where we think that we know what's true, but we're actually projecting uh, onto the object in a way that isn't true. And all of these afflictions, from the Buddhist perspective, are actually rooted in ignorance to some, in one form or another. Because we can look at anger and aversion, for example. When we talked about that before, these objects that serve as the source of our attachment or our anger, to us they appear as if the object itself is you know is actually made out of something pleasant, or it's made out of something aversive. And so we think that that is its nature. We think, whatever object, and people have different objects of attachment, different objects of aversion. Some people think that, roasted Brussels sprouts are delicious. Other people think that they are, truly awful, right? Same exact object. There's no difference in the object. Some people are allergic to peanut butter. And so for them, they see danger when there's peanut butter. They see, something that is a threat. Other people, can't go a day without eating peanut butter because they think it's so attractive as an object, right? No difference in the object, but very different reactions that we have to that object. And the fact that different people, for a variety of different reasons, have these very different views about the exact same external object, could be music, could be art, could be food, could be an activity. People are going to relate in wildly different ways, which means that, and these people, they are objectively observing the same external object, the same piece of food, the same sound, the same painting, same sculpture, whatever it is. But they're interpreting it through very different perspectives, different lenses, different experiences. But they're both convinced that they are right. They're both convinced that that object is a source of, happiness, or it is a source of pain or unpleasantness. And they're not taking responsibility for what they're bringing to that process of observing it, of cognizing it, of interacting with it. This is a very deep, you know, teaching in Buddhism that that the Buddha, you know, explained really colors all of our perspectives. And so no one is really in touch in a clear way with the object. Everything is colored by confusion, by ignorance, by misunderstanding the actual true nature of the object. And this is something that is a deep source of our dissatisfaction, of all of our afflictions. So this is something, you know, it's one of the, it can be, and it gets to such a deep level in Buddhist philosophy that it, you know, it's something that people can really study for many years, how this is coloring our perception and what to do about it. But really, all of the afflictions have um, are rooted in misunderstanding what it is that we're cognizing, misunderstanding what it is that we're really in relationship with, which gives rise to attachment, gives rise to aversion, gives rise to deluded pride, gives rise to envy and other kinds of afflictions. So it's something, you know, that over time, if you want to, you know, you can really explore in great detail. So those are the five. So we've talked about, you know, we started talking about the traditional obstacles to meditation, which were things like laziness, distraction, you know, forgetting the object, moving into distraction, non-application, over-application. And then we talked about these and mental dullness, mental excitation, these traditional obstacles. Then we talked about 5 negative mental states that are also obstacles. So, are there any thoughts or questions about that section that we've covered on the obstacles to essentially the skill of meditation, calm, generating calm, focused attention that is focused on a virtuous object? Nope. Okay. So the next section that we'll address is we're going to discuss what it means from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective to engage in a session of meditation. What are the elements of a session of meditation? So the, you know, the object of that session is only one of those elements. If you're deciding on, okay, for this particular session, I'm going to meditate on loving kindness or compassion or just do a breathing meditation, that's only one aspect of this. There's 4 different parts of this. So the first part is how we are preparing our minds. Um, so this is how we're moving into our session of meditation. So this is really kind of connecting with our body, with our mind. You know, so basically sitting in meditation, and really, when I say breathing meditation, in the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, it can serve as an object of meditation, but it's often something that's considered more a precursor to meditation because we've defined um, we've defined meditating as concentrating the mind on a virtuous object, and the breath is really a very neutral object. So if our intent in meditating on the breath is to help us to develop calm, focused attention, and we have a virtuous motivation for wanting calm, focused attention, then that can serve as a meditation. But oftentimes, in this process of preparing to meditate, we use the breath not really as the main focal object of the meditation, but as an entryway, as a period of calming the body, connecting with the body before the actual session of meditation. So it's very common in our tradition to begin with just really a couple of minutes of breathing, quote unquote, meditation, or focusing on the physical sensation of the breath, because it does give us a more productive second part of that session if we, because in our daily life, of course, the mind is very distracted. The mind is engaged in a lot of externality. We're talking to people. We're looking at things. We are, engaged in a lot of manipulation of the external world. And then we sit to engage in a session of meditation, and the mind is being withdrawn. The mind is, becoming more and more subtle. And that is a process of transition from a very external focus to a very internal focus. And if we try to just immediately jump into whatever the intended object is, whether it's loving kindness, whether it's compassion, whatever it may be, the mind really does need a couple of minutes to settle, to focus, to just become accustomed to being withdrawn from engaging in sensory objects. So using 2 or 3 or 5 minutes of concentrating on the breath can help us to have a much more productive period of meditation where the truly virtuous object is being generated on, you know, um, is being generated and then focused on. So it's really a preparatory process. So we take a couple of minutes to center, to ground the mind. You can use the body in general as the object. You can scan the body. You can use the breath as the object. But you want to kind of center and uh, get used to having the mind not be in relationship to external people, sights, sounds, etc. And then you motivate. And of course, these are, in a way, they're interchangeable in terms of their which comes first. You can certainly sit down and motivate and then engage in a few minutes of breathing meditation, or it really depends on what you feel more comfortable with. But motivation is an important part of the overall process. And so here I mentioned, I think it came up, and I mentioned last week, that this sort of question is what came up, this idea of motivation. And I mentioned that FPMT has a text, if anybody's interested. It's called Daily Prayers. It's in the Foundation store in fpmt.org, and it will help you if you want some ideas for what it looks like to motivate. But it really just means thinking about or stating your purpose. Why is it that you are engaging in this session of meditation? And we do try, with regard to this tradition, we do try to make this motivation something that's beyond just what I'm going to personally get out of this session. We may come to, and I think, again, we talked a little bit about this last week. There's many reasons why we come to, or we become interested in having a meditation practice, and a lot of those very valid interests are, feeling really stressed out, feeling overwhelmed, wanting calm, wanting spaciousness, and that's all valid and useful. And if we can try to think about, if I achieved that goal, yes, I would benefit, but also my friends would benefit, my family would benefit, my coworkers would benefit, people just, strangers that I interact with. If I have a calmer mind, a more spacious mind, a more peaceful mind, if I have less stress, if I'm less anxious, then literally every sentient being that I meet is going to be benefited, because that's going to be my baseline state. I'm going to be able to relate to them out of greater spaciousness, more peace of mind, more expansiveness, a greater sense of connection. So if we can just think, yes, I benefit, but also others benefit. And I want other people to receive that benefit. Um, and then, of course, this is something over time that can become incredibly expansive, and there's great value in that. Trying to make our motivation as expansive as possible is quite useful, because and it is it's an incredibly important idea, because it really determines, but and of course I'm not trying to dictate or to push any particular way of thinking about it, but just psychologically, um, what we get out of something depends on why we wanted to do it, right? We can think about, for example, if we if there's someone that we want to impress, right, at work or in our lives, and we know that they are into a particular spiritual tradition, right, we may then think, oh, well, I heard that someone from that tradition is giving a talk, or I'll go on YouTube maybe, and I can research that. And if we engage in that with the motivation, the intent, the goal of finding something that spiritual teacher is going to say, that I can then go back to work or go back to my friend and be like, oh, did you hear about what this person said? Just so that we can, you know, um, kind of impress that person, then that's all we're going to get out of that spiritual tradition, that teacher. They might be giving this incredible lesson about loving kindness, about compassion, about generosity, about patience, but we're only taking from it what aligns with our motivation, with our intent, with our goal. Our goal was, I just want to find some sentence, some nugget that I can write down, that I can remember, that I can go back and impress this other person with. And so it could have been the most amazing teaching that that's going to be totally wasted, totally, on us. Everybody else in the audience or that saw it, they might have gone into that thinking, how can I use this to grow as a person? How can I use this to transform my mind, to genuinely become more patient, to genuinely become more kind, more compassionate, more whatever it might be? And they're thinking, oh, I can use this piece, I can integrate this, I can start practicing this. This is how I can start meditating on what they said here, because that was their framing, that was their intent, that was their motivation for what their purpose was in, even why did they show up, why did they click on that video, why did they go to that rally, that teaching, that whatever it is. And so same exact teacher, same exact information presented, but the expansiveness of the person engaging with that material resulted in vastly different outcomes for the different people involved. And it's the same for our spiritual practice. If we go into it thinking all I want to get out of this is more, more calm, more enjoyment, more peace of mind, we'll get that. That will happen if we stick with it. If that, but and that's okay. That will happen, and that's fine. But it could have been so much broader and so much deeper and so much more expansive if we try to think about how is this going to impact my ability to be in relation to all of these other people. What will it really mean for all of my connections, all of my relationships with everyone that I'm around? Because we will find ways of integrating it and seeing so much more deep meaning and purpose in what we're doing. And this is something that, of course, it progresses organically over time. Um, but it's also true that, we can kind of fake it till we make it too. We can just try to have a broad motivation, even if it's not like truly deeply felt in the beginning. We can try it on. We can just experiment and see, if in the beginning of this session, I just take some time to generate this really broad motivation, how is that going to impact whatever comes next? It doesn't matter what comes next, but it will color what comes next in really impactful ways. And then over time, with familiarity, with repetition, um, then it does become more heartfelt. It does become, more spontaneous, more, truly a part of what we, you know, that we really do mean it in deeper and deeper ways. So I think in general, we want to have this altruistic intention. We want to not only think about our own interests. We want to think about how what we are doing is of benefit in a wider way. So then the third part of this is the actual session, right? We connected with our body, with our mind, we settled, then we motivated. And now with that motivation, with stating our purpose, we engage in the actual session. And this, can be whatever we want it to be. Um, we we do want to decide ahead of time what it will be, because you don't want to switch. You don't want to, think, well, this isn't going well, so I'll just do something else. Like, you do want to have discipline, right? We've talked about how we want to train the mind in calm, focused attention, and how we don't want to indulge in distraction, right? And distraction is anything that arises in the mind that's not the intended object of meditation, which means we have to have one intended object of meditation. That if it's analytical, we talked about analytical meditations. If it's analytical in nature, then there can be different parts to that meditation, but still there are things that are in bounds and there are things that are out of bounds. And if we've moved out of bounds, then we need to go back in bounds. We need to let go of whatever that is, even if it's another virtuous object, right? We might be reminded of, a teaching that we heard on the topic that we're meditating on. And we might be reminded, like maybe the Dalai Lama gave that teaching. And so then we start thinking how amazing the Dalai Lama is, and we feel so grateful, right? That's, if we've taken the Dalai Lama as like someone that is a teacher for us, that is a whole separate kind of meditation that we can do, thinking about the Dalai Lama's qualities and so on, how grateful we are to have someone like that in our world. Um, but if we're intending to do a meditation on, let's say, impermanence or loving kindness, and we're just recollecting, oh, but I heard the Dalai Lama teaching on loving kindness, even though thinking about his qualities is a virtuous object, it's still a distraction if the intended object is just loving kindness or just impermanence. So we have to really be clear about, this is my object, and these are the parts of my object that are appropriate, that are within the boundary of that topic, and anything that are, and of course, it's also true, we're going to think about dinner, and we're going to think about the fight that we had, and remember all of those, the five traditional obstacles, the five negative mental states, mental excitement, mental dullness, all of that is going to be in play. So a lot of it isn't going to be as rarefied as another virtuous object. It's probably going to be a not so virtuous object. But regardless, we know we need to keep moving the mind back to the intended object. Um, so with this, of course, it's also important to think about how long all of these different parts are going to take, right? In the beginning, we probably, and we want to decide this too up front, because again, this is another aspect of discipline. Just like settling on the intended virtuous object and not changing it, not being like, oh, I just did loving kindness yesterday, or I just did loving kindness this morning, and now I'm doing it again. How about I switch to, because it doesn't really matter what the intended object is. Our mind isn't accustomed to focusing on one thing for even several minutes, right? Our mind is accustomed to, going off in all kinds of other directions, or tending toward dullness, tending toward sleepiness, darkness, heaviness. So we have to fight against those impulses by not giving into, maybe this will be different if I just pick a different object, and give my mind, because that there's a sort of sense of relief in releasing that discipline, right? Oh, I intended to do loving kindness, but maybe I should just now instead, do impermanence, or instead think about my teacher or whatever. That kind of lets our mind off the hook in a way. And if we keep doing that, we won't progress in being able to stay with one intended object. Um, but also another way that we might let ourselves off the hook is if we just cut the session short. If we just, and of course we have to know, if it's really truly impossible, like, then of course, if we thought we could meditate, but really we only slept, 2 or 3 hours the night before, and it's just not possible, then of course we should just let it go and, maybe take a nap and come back to it later. Like, we do have to be practical. But if it's just, that it feels a little bit uncomfortable, that we're just dealing with the tension of sticking with it. We might also say, well, this has been long enough. It's been 5 minutes, it's been 7 minutes, it's long enough, and I'm done now. So we do need to think about deciding how long we really are going to have this session be. And it should be short. It shouldn't be 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It should really be 10 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that, really no more than 10 minutes. So maybe set some sort of very gentle timer that's going to make a very, very gentle, non-disruptive chime or something at the end of 10 minutes. Um, but having the discipline of, until I hear that chime, I'm gonna I'm really gonna just make a genuine effort to keep coming back from distraction. Because otherwise, if we just leave it up to ourselves, then again, we're lacking the discipline that we really need to make progress over time. Um, and of course, over the course of years, decades, we do increase these how long our sessions are. And there's no hard and fast one right way to do that. But generally, you want to think about, you want to reflect on, okay, I said 5 minutes, and of that 5 minutes, how long can I really say I was on the intended object versus how long was I in distraction? And if that percentage is really low, then it's not time to add more minutes to your session. You need to stay there until you can say, I was on the object, for 70, 80, 90% of that 5 minutes, which is a real accomplishment. And then you can add 5 minutes. And then you want to wait until you can say that again, until that's true again. And that's how you decide. So, what the other lever that you can pull is, in a day, how many sessions, right? If you're only going to do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, fine, no problem. That's appropriate. But you can do two of those. You can do four of those in a day, if possible. Of course, the the first best goal is to get to a point where you're not skipping days, where it's 10 minutes every single day, 7 days a week. And that can take you months to get to that goal. And that's perfectly fine, because hopefully you've got years, you've got decades left in this life, right? So if it takes you 6 months to get to the point where it is every single day, no problem. But you do want to get to that point. If you never get to that point, then that's a real shame, in terms of being able to use meditation as this incredible tool that can transform your mind. So, there's no reason to rush to feel like it has to be 7 days a week right now. You can definitely, this week, it's one day a week. Next week, it's 2 days a week. The week after that, it's still 2 days a week. The week after that, it's 3 days a week. The week and the 2 weeks after that, it's still 3 days a week. The week after that, it's 4 days a week. And then for the next 2 months, it's 4 days a week, et cetera, et cetera. Building that habit, in a way that sticks, is the only thing that's important, not thinking that it needs to be now and that it needs to, but just getting to that point. And then, great. Now, once you've, and of course, everybody gets sick, everybody has, crises, and it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to meditate 7 days a week for the next 20, 30, 50 years. You're going to have periods where you fall off, the tendency. Of course, that will happen. But the ideal is 7 days a week, And then when that's happening more than it's not happening, that's when you can think about, okay, twice a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, or 4 times a day on the weekend, twice a day on weekdays because I'm working, and so on. Like that. So it's much better to pull the lever of multiple sessions than it is long sessions, because the goal is, how much of the session can I genuinely say I was absorbed in the intended object? And you're not going to increase that percentage by trying to have really long, unproductive sessions of daydreaming, sessions of, because it's really difficult to actually stay on the intended object. And so, you know, if you have this mistaken view that you can do an hour, you know, you're really going to you're going to end up practicing bad habits. You're going to end up not being able to think about your bodily position, you know, and you're going to be slouching. You're going to you're going to basically be doing what feels comfortable, which is daydreaming, which is planning, ruminating. And then you're going to associate what should be meditation with daydreaming, with relaxing, with ruminating, with all of these things that are not focusing on the virtuous object. Um, so you do have to be really skillful in how you make changes to your schedule of meditation. And then there's the fourth of these four parts is what is called dedication. And dedication is very similar to motivation, except that you've now done something, right? When you were motivating, you were thinking about why you were about to do something. You hadn't yet done it. And now you've finished that session of meditation. You've done 5 minutes or 10 minutes of thinking about impermanence, thinking about loving kindness, thinking about compassion, generosity, whatever it might be. And now you dedicate what you've done. And this is also quite important psychologically, because it's thinking about the benefits of what has actually occurred and kind of giving it away or channeling or offering what you've done. Because and this is psychologically really important, because there's a real danger that our ego will kind of co-opt our spiritual practice, right? We think, oh, I just did 5 minutes of loving kindness meditation. I'm amazing, right? There's so many other people who aren't doing that. I'm better than all of these other people who didn't spend their time doing this. Um, and it can feed our delusions. Our meditation practice, our spiritual practice can really feed our delusions by thinking, how amazing am I that I have done this thing? But if we think, I did this thing, and may what I have done, may the benefits of that actually, you know, ripen on others. May this be something that benefits other people, because, and again, it's connected to our motivation. But if we think, when we motivated, if we think, I hope, or my intent is, or my wish is, what I'm about to do is going to help me to actually be of benefit to others. And then we do it. And now we think, whatever I have done, may that be of benefit to others. May that help, those around me in this way. Then we've sort of we disidentify with it. We just think, it isn't something that I have done. It's this thing that I wish is useful for everybody but me, really, essentially. Now, of course, we are the beneficiaries of training the mind, of cultivating the mind in this way, but we're intentionally thinking about not that, but thinking about how this is really of benefit for everyone else. And this is also something that we can do in an incredibly, I mentioned the text, daily prayers. There's really beautiful dedication prayers. There's really expansive, poetic, And from the Buddhist perspective, the more expansive, the more um, altruistic, the biggest kind of dedication practice that we can do, the better, because that also is related to what we're going to receive ourselves out of this. The vaster our motivation is, and the vaster our dedication is, the more beneficial that session of meditation, really is for ourselves and for others. Um, but it's sort of like before we did the meditation, there was nothing to dedicate, there was nothing to offer. And now we have this thing, we've actually become more familiar with loving kindness, with compassion, with generosity, with patience than we were before we did the actual session. So we have, in a way, sort of a substance. We have a thing that we can say, this is what I'm offering. The all of the positivity that I've generated by actually doing that session, that's the substance, that's this thing that I'm able to offer to others. Any thoughts or questions? Those are the four. Mhm.
Hey, I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Um, where was for, what do you recommend um for setting your intended object um in terms of like I don't know, like resources of what I I kind of just what I kind of just take a lot from some of the books I'm reading and some of the guided meditations I have, but like when I'm just kind of on my own,
Mhm.
what kind of resources do you recommend or like how do I find those?
Yeah, so I mean, again, a person's practice is very personal, very individual. It really depends on, where they are, what their ultimate goal is. So, um, we, a couple good places to start, could be, there's a book called How to Meditate by Kathleen McDonald. Um, she has a lot of guided meditations that are in that book. That can be a good resource. She has another book um, called Awakening the Kind Heart. Again, lots of individual contemplations that are in there. There's a book called Spiritual Friends um, that has, again, a number of different contemplations. Those are three, books that will give you a number of different um, individual contemplations. If a person has the goal for themselves of, they've decided that, like, really following the Tibetan Buddhist spiritual path is for them, then that's different, right? I mean, of course, as I said, a person's practice is up to them. What are they trying to do? Are they just trying to be more compassionate, be more loving, be more kind, be more generous? That's amazing, right? And that may be what it is. A person cannot even be from a completely different religious tradition. They can use sections of the Bible or sections of the Quran or the Torah, or these different, they can take different sermons or different, and like, what is the meaning of this? And, kind of use that as an analytical meditation as well. And so those three books that I mentioned, they're fairly general, in there, the focus is, as I mentioned, kind of on broad, general, constructive states of mind, like loving kindness, compassion, generosity, patience, ethics, and so on. A more focused or serious or concentrated approach to meditation from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective that is the focal point of people who, again, who have decided that this is their path, is what's called the Lam Rim, or the stages of the path to enlightenment. And so for this person, they are someone who is on board, kind of in a more serious way with the Buddhist path, with what the Buddha taught, and their goal is the Buddha's goal, which is enlightenment, right? Which is really transforming the mind in this radical way, that goes much further, much deeper than just these constructive states of mind. So for that, that's a bigger, longer, more detailed process. I would generally recommend, if a person suspects that they might end up, in that direction, I would read His Holiness's. I would start kind of reading, the books by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, kind of starting anywhere with what he's written. Some books are like From Here to Enlightenment, How to See Yourself as You Really Are, How to Practice. You know, Books by the Dalai Lama, I would say, are a really good, place to start to kind of maybe see if is that true for myself? Might I be going in that direction? Um, if that's already happened and now it's like definitely even more concentrated, then the book that I would recommend um, is called Practicing the Path by Yangtze Rinpoche. That is a book that is on the stages of the path. So when I say Lam Rim, or the stages of the path, that and this is also something that the Buddhism in a Nutshell class is really based on, is the stages of the path, or the Lam Rim. Lam Rim is a genre of literature in Tibetan Buddhism where great masters of the past have looked at the sutras that the Buddha, gave. The Buddha traveled around and spoke to people for decades, and his the highly realized spiritual masters that were around him, that were his immediate disciples, some of them they had so developed their minds that they had perfect recall, and they were able to transmit these conversations that the Buddha had. And eventually, so for hundreds of years, that was an oral transmission of all of what became known as the sutras, all of these conversations that the Buddha had with the people that he came into contact with. And but the sutra material is incredibly vast, and the Buddha would say different things to different people in order to benefit them based on their unique needs. So it's very dense, complicated, vast material. The Lam Rim is an effort by a number of great masters to condense and systematize um, all of that material in a way that's actually very easy for us to practice, for us to understand what was the Buddha's intent, what was his, actual goal, or and then how do we replicate the insights that the Buddha had? because this idea of enlightenment means becoming a Buddha, means actually transforming ordinary mind into enlightened mind. And the historical Buddha is just someone who did that. And we can do that if we choose to. Um, and the Buddha's purpose in teaching was to explain what he did that resulted in his enlightenment, and basically saying this is the recipe, these are the, as I said, the stages of the path, this is the individual insights that the Buddha needed to have and did have that resulted in the transformation of his ordinary mind into enlightened mind. So it is a reliable, repeatable path of training that creates Buddhas, that creates, just like we in our society, we have colleges, universities that churn out doctors and nurses and lawyers and accountants. It's a path of training, right? You're in high school and you're not a doctor, but we know how to transform your mind into the mind of a doctor by giving you certain competencies, certain insights, certain abilities, certain knowledge, certain capacities. And that's what a Buddha is. A Buddha is a consciousness that's characterized by certain competencies, certain knowledge, certain insights, certain abilities that have been trained in, that have been cultivated intentionally. So, for someone who's really practicing Tibetan Buddhism in this deep way, this serious way, the training in the Lam Rim is the foundation of that process. It's why it's called the stages of the path to enlightenment. And so would I say that Yangtze Rinpoche is practicing the path as the first book? No, probably not. As I mentioned, From Here to Enlightenment, How to Practice, How to See Yourself as You Really Are, books by the Dalai Lama, I think kind of lay a foundation, kind of lay a groundwork. Um, if a person feels like, yeah, for a couple of years I've been doing this sort of general reading, then maybe that person could do Yangtze Rinpoche is practicing the path. Um, but that is a Lam Rim. Yangtze Rinpoche is alive right now. He's a living, but he wrote a commentary on the Lam Rim Chenmo, the great treatise on the stages of the path. And I think it's the best first Lam Rim book. There are other Lam Rim books that a person could and would read later. But I think Youngster, because he's a living, he wrote it for the Western mind. He wrote it, whereas Lama Tsongkhapa, who's the founder of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that our center is affiliated with, he was writing, hundreds of years ago for monks who lived. So it's a little bit denser. It's a little bit, it's not as immediately accessible as Rinpoche's, book on practicing the path. Um, but that is for a really, committed practitioner, the Lam Rim is the foundational practice. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, so let's take a moment then to engage in a meditation. And this meditation will take a little bit of time to kind of explain before we do it. It's very visual. So it does require kind of having a picture in your mind, before you do it. So I'll kind of go through what this visualization is so that you can try to hold that picture in your mind. It's called the 9 round breathing meditation. So this is an option. I mentioned, as we're settling into a session of meditation, you can just focus on the physical sensation of the breath. If you want to, you could try to also work with this meditation as a way of kind of clearing the mind, settling the mind. And this is something that you can do either before a session of meditation, or you can just do it in the car, like, in your car before you go into work, or, on your lunch break. Or it's a really good kind of grounding, clearing kind of technique that you can kind of just have in your back pocket and pull out whenever you feel like you want to kind of clear out the mind, ground the mind, and so on. So it's the visualization is centered around this idea in Buddhism of what they call the subtle energy system of the body. So, in Buddhism, there's an understanding. So, this is actually coming from a very deep, kind of esoteric tradition in Buddhism where there is teaching on the subtle energy system of the body, because the the mind is something. We talked about how the mind is an energy that is formless, that is colorless, that is odorless, and it pervades the whole of our body. And so it is kind of empowered by all of these, what they basically they would say kind of main channels or energetic centers and channels that allow the mind to pervade the body. So there's 3 main kind of highways that the energy flows in the body, and they call them the central channel, and then the left and the right channels. So, of course, these are not physical structures in the body. These are energetic kind of ways of thinking about how energy flows throughout the body. The central, and so this visualization, these are luminous sort of tubes of light, and the central channel is something that we visualize as being inside the body, between the eyebrows, in what you might understand or call the third eye. Right here between the eyebrows. So that's where the opening of this central channel is. So this tube of light begins inside the body, between the eyebrows, and you think about it basically as being roughly the diameter of your pinky finger, this tube, this luminous tube of light. And it begins here. And then what they say is that it goes up to the top of the back of the head, the crown of the head, from here up to the top of the back of the head. And then from there, it curves down, and it goes down, and it basically follows in front of the spine. Um, and then it terminates at a point 4 finger widths below the level of the navel inside the body, just in front of the spine, this central channel. So you can think about it kind of like an umbrella handle, coming from here, curving around to the top of the back of the head, going straight down in front of the spine, being this light, luminous, energetic tube that has this opening here. And then it has another opening at the bottom of this channel. So it's the thin, flexible, luminous, energetic channel with these 2 openings. The left and the right channels begin in the nostrils, and they're also thin, flexible, luminous tubes of light, and but they're a little bit smaller than the central channel, slightly smaller than the diameter of your pinky finger. And they basically follow the central channel, and then they also curve up and around and back to the top of the crown of the head, and then they also go straight down. But at the bottom, this termination point, 4 finger widths below the level of the navel, they curve into, they wrap into the central channel at the bottom. They terminate and they flow into the bottom of the central channel. So that's the visualization that you try to hold as you're engaging in this meditation. And so it is a breathing, as I said, it's called the 9 round breathing meditation. So it is a breathing meditation. Um, but what you want to do is you want to visualize breathing in light through the nostrils that is filling the channel and then kind of flowing into the central channel and dispelling kind of stale, you could think of it as smoke or pollution, oil, anything that kind of for you represents kind of stale energy in this system, this energetic system. So that's the basic premise of the meditation. It'll become a little bit more clear as we do it. It's called 9 round because there's 3 different parts to it, and there's 3 breaths in each part. So I've explained it, and I'll continue to explain it as we engage in it. But that's the general idea. So let's find just a comfortable upright position. So we start by trying to generate that visualization, thinking of these three energy channels. The central channel and the left and the right channels. They're thin, they're flexible, they're luminous tubes of light, beginning and ending in those places. The third eye, the right nostril, and the left nostril. We just try to hold this understanding that these energy highways exist in a very, very subtle, energetic way. And then we take our right index finger and we close our left nostril. So we're only breathing in through the right nostril. And we visualize as we breathe in that we breathe in luminous, fresh energy, crystalline in nature, and it fills this right channel all the way down, right, on the in breath. And it kind of pools at the very bottom where these 3 channels are situated. And then, so we're breathing in on the in breath, we're breathing in this crystalline energy, and it's kind of at the top of the in breath, we kind of visualize all of that crystalline energy has traveled down through the right central channel. And there's this place where these 3 channels meet. And that crystalline energy has pooled there at the top of the in breath. And then at the very top of the in breath, we release that left nostril that's blocked. And we now close the right nostril and we breathe out through the left nostril. And as we breathe out, we visualize that that pool is being kind of forced up through the left central channel and is pushing out any stale, any blocked negative energy out of, and you can think of that as smoke or oil, whatever works for you. So that's now being ejected out of the left central, the left channel through the force of the exhalation. So you just breathe out naturally, and then you repeat that two more times. You go back to breathing in through the right nostril, breathing in the crystalline, clear, refreshing energy. And that's collecting in the space there. And then it's when you breathe out, you're forcing that up and out through the left channel. And you do that 3 times. That's the first round of 3. 1, 2, 3. And now for the second round of 3, you just do the reverse. So you keep the right channel, the right nostril blocked. And now you're breathing in through your left nostril and you're breathing out through your right nostril. So you're just reversing this process. 1, 2, 3. And then the third round of 3 is both nostrils are unblocked and you're breathing in through both and you're breathing out through both. However, on the out breath, you don't visualize that the energy is coming out through the nostrils. You now visualize that because the right and the left are curving into the central channel, that actually that when that it's you're breathing in through both right and left, and so you're breathing in the crystalline, clear, refreshing energy through right and left. But the visualization is that that crystalline, clear, refreshing energy is now being pushed up through the central channel, which again, the opening of the central channel is here. So you actually are visualizing, although your actual exhalation is obviously through the nostrils, you join that with the visualization of ejecting that stale energy through the opening that's here in the third eye, you could say, the opening of the central channel. So the crystalline energy is pooling, and then through the force of the exhalation, it's being brought up through the central channel and sent out, directly into space through this opening. That's the third set of 3. So nothing blocked and just really focusing on the visual aspect of that. One, two, three. So now, as you're working with this, I find that um, you can get a little bit lightheaded. If you do this you do have to kind of really think about not trying to go too fast. If you're working with this for 2, 3, 5 minutes, you do have to kind of really think about just allowing yourself to breathe slowly, breathe naturally, and not forcing any kind of particular rhythm. But now that we understand what those three phases are, just on our own, we'll go through, 2, 3 minutes of, doing this on our own, really again, focusing on the visualization. So 3, 3, and 3. And we'll just do that. So I won't lead it. We'll just do it now on our own. All right. So again, that's another option, to use as your grounding, you're settling before a session of meditation, something that you can use as a stress relief kind of technique. Um, it's really good for, kind of getting the mind in a subtler state, really getting the mind into a deeper, more relaxed, more focused state. So we do have a couple of more minutes. Are there any thoughts or questions about anything that we've covered in the course that would be helpful for people to have more information about?
I had a question
Mhm,
just about I think it was over application.
mhm.
Pretty much. Can you just elaborate on that again?
Yeah, so over application, I mean, luckily, we're much more likely for a beginner meditator, we're much more likely to be engaged in under application, which means, we've become distracted, but the distraction is something that we're indulging in, and we're just not doing anything about it. We haven't, we're not being vigilant, we're indulging in the distraction, we're not remembering, oh, right, I'm supposed to let go of this distraction. I'm supposed to bring my mind back to the intended object. That's really the danger for a beginner meditator like us. That's probably what we're going to be dealing with is under application, just sort of being like, oh, this is actually peaceful, or, I'd rather think about this distraction. Over application is what happens for a more advanced meditator who has been meditating for probably decades, and for a long time they they were someone who had more, now as someone who's meditated for decades, the kinds of distractions that are arising are very light. Yes, they're maybe their mind is wandering a bit. Maybe the object is not as, over the course of their session, maybe the object becomes a little bit less intense, a little bit less vibrant. However, for a long time, the kinds of distractions that were arising were more heavy, more intense. And so they have a tendency it's kind of like driving a car, right? When it's sort of like overcorrecting, right? When if you've drifted just slightly out of your lane, in the beginning when you're just learning to drive, and you're really unsteady, you're not able to really hold the car in a straight line when you're going fast, and you're then you're making these bigger corrections because you're moving, this is what you want to do, but you're going here and you're going there, so you're always, and then you have this sort of muscle memory of these bigger corrections. So that's over application. When it's just past habit, past, you know uh, you what's happening now is very light distractions. And if you respond to a very light distraction with overly tightening the mind, or overly, then actually the process of overly tightening the mind is itself an obstacle to what's happening for you as an advanced meditator, as someone who doesn't actually have strong distraction arising. The overcorrection can actually cause you to sort of crash, right? You're jerking yourself back too strongly. So you need to recognize that you're pumping the brakes, or you're tight, you're doing too much, and you need to let go of that past habit of strongly reacting to what's happening, because you've moved beyond those really coarse, distractions, those really strong, intense distractions. And now you just need these light touches, these, very, very small corrections to get you back on. So you have to become familiar with just tapping yourself back onto the object. But again, that's a an obstacle that you don't really, there's no danger of that for us. That's something that if you're on the seventh or eighth or level of calm abiding, then then that can be what you need to figure out. But excuse me. So so we're out of time, and we're unfortunately at the end of our course, Meditation 101. As I said, Introduction to Mindfulness with Venerable Katie begins next week, and that will go for 5 weeks. It's a little bit of a longer course, still 7 to 8:30 on Tuesdays. And again, Venerable Yunten is teaching this weekend a weekend course on building and deepening your meditation practice. So that's again very related to everything that we're looking at as well. But all right, if there's a final thought or question, we can address it. Otherwise, we are all done for the course.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Have a great night. Anthony, did you have a question?
No, I wanted to say thank you. And will this come up again? Will this course come up again or?
Yes, it's one of the introductory courses that we do. So Introduction to Mindfulness, Meditation 101, and Buddhism in a Nutshell, and also a course called Being Your Own Therapist. Those are the kind of four introductory level courses that we do. So we do each of those, 3 or 4 times a year.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great night.